Welcome to Pam Jammer's Magical Tales. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share to stay updated. If you'd like to support the channel, see sequels, vote on upcoming stories, or even chat with us, check out my Patreon. Every bit of support helps bring more magical stories to life. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Habit Breaker Part 1. Chapter 1, The Request. The air inside room 114 of the Shady Rest Motor Lodge was thick with the distinct, oily stench of stale tobacco, industrial-grade pine cleaner, and the unmistakable, heavy musk of decades of human despair. It was a gross old motel, the kind of place specifically designed for men in the middle of a catastrophic transition, newly divorced guys who needed a temporary bunker to figure out what the next step of their shattered lives was going to be, but who couldn't bring themselves to sign a long-term lease before they actually knew what that plan looked like. Josh sat on the edge of a mattress that sagged so deeply in the center it felt like a sinkhole. The mustard-colored bedspread was stiff with age and countless commercial washings, though Josh was highly suspicious that it hadn't actually been laundered since the turn of the millennium. Outside, a miserable, grey Midwestern drizzle had been coming down all day, streaking the grime on the single, reinforced window and turning the gravel parking lot into a soup of muddy potholes. To pass the time, Josh had found himself descending into increasingly dark thoughts. He stared at the water-stained acoustic tiles on the ceiling, wondering with a grim, detached curiosity how many people had actually died within these four walls. This was a transient dumping ground. He wondered if someone had ever taken their last breath right here in this room, on this exact saggy mattress, staring up at that exact same water stain that vaguely resembled the shape of Ohio. A couple of doors down, there was a constant, rhythmic trickle of foot traffic, men with hunched shoulders and twitching hands arriving at 20-minute intervals, knocking twice, and leaving moments later. He was absolutely positive that heavy drugs were being sold just 2 rooms over. He didn't like it here. Josh sighed, his hand instinctively flying to his mouth as a phantom craving hit him right in the back of his throat. He had thrown his last crushed pack of Marlboro Reds into a gas station trash can only 48 hours ago. It hadn't been a decision brought on by a sudden awakening about his physical health. It was fueled entirely by a bitter, desperate spike of post-divorce vanity. After his wife's lawyer had systematically stripped him of his dignity in the settlement, Josh had looked in the stained mirror of this very motel room and realized he smelled like an ashtray, looked haggard, and was rapidly sliding into unmarketable bachelorhood. He needed to change his trajectory. He needed to make himself desirable to women again, not because he was actually ready to date, but because his fractured ego desperately demanded a win. He wanted to build a version of himself that was sharp, clean, and fit, a version he could put on display so he could eventually prove to his ex-wife that his survival wasn't just guaranteed, but that his absence was entirely their loss. But hiding the raw, clawing desperation of a 2-day-old nicotine withdrawal was proving to be a nightmare. To compensate for the agonizing lack of chemical calm, his lifelong oral fixation had gone into absolute overdrive. He was constantly sticking something in his mouth just to keep his jaw from clenching. Right now, he was aggressively chewing on the mangled end of a thick plastic straw he'd salvaged from a fast food cup earlier that morning. His teeth flattened the plastic until it clicked rhythmically against his incisors, the rapid click-click-click filling the quiet room like the countdown timer on his own fraying sanity. With his left hand, he held his cracked iPhone, thumbing through the digital ether. He was looking up his high school ex-sweetheart, Anna Marie. He'd been doing it for hours, falling down a rabbit hole of digital archiving that made his chest feel hollow. On all the socials, she looked impossibly happy. Married. And rich. Unbelievably, cartoonishly rich. He stared at the screen, the plastic straw clicking rapidly against his teeth as he reflected on the wreckage of their past. He thought about how he had broken up with her. Twice. He had completely shattered her heart, walking away from the only girl who had ever truly looked at him like he was the center of the universe. In retrospect, sitting here in the dim, depressing light of a bargain basement motel, He told himself the truth that he had spent 20 years running away from. He had dumped her because he was utterly, single-mindedly terrified that she was starting to figure out his secret. He had a thing for diapers. He had known it ever since he could remember, a deeply buried, fiercely guarded core aspect of his psychology that he viewed as an unforgivable defect. When he was in high school, he probably wasn't even self-aware enough to consciously realize that's why he broke up with her. Back then, it had just felt like an overwhelming, suffocating panic. The closer Anna-Marie got, the more she wanted to spend every waking moment with him, the more the terror grew. She was going to find out. Then word would spread and everyone would hate him. So, his survival instinct had kicked in, and he had struck first. He cut her loose. Then, a few weeks later, a wave of agonizing regret had driven him back to her, begging for forgiveness. She had given it to him, open-hearted and vulnerable, only for the exact same claustrophobic panic to take hold of him 3 months later. He had dumped her a second time, worse than the first. She had cried so much. He could still hear the raw, ragged sound of her sobbing in the front seat of his beat-up Chevy truck, her face buried in her hands, completely shattered because she couldn't understand what she had done wrong. Josh took a deep breath, trying to push the memory away, but it stuck in his throat like ash. He chewed the straw harder. He adjusted his posture, and as he did, a loud, distinct crinkling sound echoed through the quiet motel room. He was currently wearing a diaper. It was a thick, plastic-backed, medical-grade brief, securely taped over his hips. Ever since the divorce papers had been served and his wife had packed her bags, Josh had spent pretty much every single minute he wasn't working taped into padding. It was his ultimate sanctuary, a return to a state of absolute, unburdened security. But right here, in this grimy, suspect hotel room, the experience felt entirely different. Usually, the thick, heavy weight between his thighs provided a soothing, therapeutic warmth that calmed his frayed nerves. Today, surrounded by the smell of pine cleaner and the distant thumping of a drug den, it felt entirely naughty. It felt sordid. It felt like a manifestation of his own degradation rather than a source of healing. He needed comfort, he needed an escape from the reality of his mid-30s stagnation, but the diaper alone wasn't enough to cleanse the toxic buildup of his own guilt. At least he still had his job. That was the one anchor keeping his ego tethered to reality. Josh could drive heavy machines like nobody's business. When he was operating equipment, the noise of the world vanished, replaced by the mechanical harmony of hydraulics and diesel engines. His commercial landscaping gig paid him incredibly well. In fact, he was semi-famous in the Kansas City landscaping world for what he could do with a backhoe. He had an intuitive, almost artistic touch with a bucket. He could grade a slope to within a fraction of an inch just by the feel of the chassis beneath his seat, and he could drop a 100-foot oak tree precisely between 2 multi-million-dollar glass sunrooms without leaving a single scratch. He regularly had offers from rival landscaping operations trying to scalp him, offering him higher hourly rates because his reputation preceded him. But his professional prowess didn't help the fact that right now, as a man, he felt like absolute, unmitigated crap. His talent just ensured that he never had to worry about affording his next meal, which, he supposed, was something. But money couldn't buy a clean conscience, and it couldn't scrub the memories from his mind. He returned his gaze to the glowing screen of his phone, his thumb dragging down to refresh the page. He still couldn't believe how obscenely rich his ex-girlfriend had become based on the crumbs he was finding online. Most of her personal profiles were heavily locked down, set to maximum privacy settings, but Josh was creeping with a practiced, desperate efficiency. He was looking at her friends' public posts which frequently included her in the photos. There she was. Anna-Marie. Josh's breath hitched as he zoomed in on a photo taken just 3 weeks ago at a charity gala in Omaha. She was stunning. Impossibly so. She stood at a commanding 6 feet 1 inch, a statuesque, breathtaking presence that looked like she could physically dominate any room she walked into. She had a sharp, striking, and sophisticated elegance that belonged on a network broadcast. Her jawline was strong and square, her cheekbones highly defined, and her pale complexion was flawless, dotted with a few light, youthful freckles across the bridge of her nose. Her piercing icy blue eyes seemed to stare straight through the camera lens, straight through 20 years of time, and right into Josh's pathetic motel room. Her hair was cut into an impeccably coiffed, sharp blonde bob, modern and completely flawless. But what struck Josh the most, what made his heart hammer against his ribs and his diaper crinkle loudly as his legs tensed, was her build. She possessed an incredibly voluptuous, full-curved frame. Even beneath the high-end, tailored country club attire she wore, a crisp, immaculate white linen blouse and a tailored skirt, her silhouette was remarkably heavy and full, featuring exceptionally large, heavy breasts that gave her a deeply maternal, commanding aura. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had conquered every obstacle in her path, completely detached from the broken teenage girl he had left behind in the dirt of their hometown. Josh spit the mangled plastic straw out of his mouth, his chest tightening with a sudden, suffocating wave of loneliness and midlife stagnation. He looked around the room. The peeling wallpaper. The stains on the carpet. The crinkling plastic between his legs. He felt so incredibly small. He felt a desperate, pathetic urge for validation, a hunger to know if any part of the girl who had loved him so fiercely still existed, or if he was completely erased from her history. He wanted to touch that warmth again. He wanted to soothe his fractured ego by seeing if he still held any sway over her, if he could find a sliver of absolution in her eyes. Then, without thinking about it for too long, operating on a pure, reckless impulse driven by loneliness and a sudden spike of adrenaline, his thumb hovered over the screen. He clicked the blue button. Friend request sent. The moment the text changed, a cold sweat broke out across Josh's forehead. His heart raced. He hadn't reached out to her since the day of that brutal second breakup. It had been 15 long years since he had ever made an attempt to contact her directly, despite his frequent, quiet online lurking over the years. He dropped the phone onto his chest, staring at the ceiling, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He had absolutely no idea if she would accept it. Why would she? She looked like she had moved on to a completely different echelon of humanity. She was married, wealthy, sophisticated, and pristine. Why on earth would she make herself vulnerable again to the man who had broken her trust twice, who had discarded her like trash to protect a secret he was still hiding? To drown out the agonizing silence and the internal voice telling him what a pathetic loser he was, Josh reached for the ancient, sticky remote control on the nightstand. He turned on the tube television bolted to the dresser. A marathon of a gold mining reality TV show was playing, the loud, dramatic music and the roaring engines of massive dirt-moving wash plants filling the depressing room. He usually loved these shows. Watching guys operate big iron in the wilderness was right up his alley, but tonight, the heavy machinery couldn't distract him. He laid back in the suspect motel bed, stripped down to just his thick, white plastic-backed diaper, feeling a profound, heavy sadness settle deep into his bones. The plastic crinkled softly every time he moved. He held the phone inches from his face, his thumb compulsively dragging the screen down every few seconds, refreshing the app, waiting, hoping, and dreading to see if she would accept his request, entirely unaware that across the state line in Omaha, a trap was being set into motion. Chapter 2, The Reply. The midday May sun beat down relentlessly on the active construction site, baking the raw, churned earth of a half-finished backyard into a pale, dusty clay. Josh stood at the controls of a high-end, heavy-duty compact track loader, his hands moving across the dual joysticks with the effortless, fluid rhythm of a concert pianist. Around him, the skeleton of a massive, multi-million-dollar suburban McMansion loomed, a monument to new money and architectural excess, but Josh wasn't looking at the house. His entire universe was dialed into the bucket of his machine. He was creating a meticulously tiered, three-step retaining wall landscape out of massive, 500-pound blocks of textured grey limestone. It was a job that required absolute, expert-level precision. One wrong tilt of his wrist, a fraction of an inch too much pressure on the hydraulics, and a block would crush the delicate drainage tiles or throw the entire grade off by a noticeable margin. But Josh didn't make mistakes like that. He worked with a cold, mathematical certainty. He could feel the exact center of gravity of the heavy stones through the metal chassis of the loader, balancing the immense weight as he set each block perfectly level into its crushed stone bedding. To the average onlooker, it looked easy, but to those who knew, it was art. Even here, locked in the zone of his favorite daily escape, his physical tics remained. A thick, clear plastic straw was jammed into the left corner of his mouth, the end chewed into a shredded, flattened mess that clicked rhythmically against his teeth whenever he repositioned a stone. Beneath the sleeve of his sweat-stained high-visibility t-shirt, a square, flesh-colored nicotine patch was firmly adhered to his bicep. He was still clean. 7 months without a single cigarette. Every grueling day of the past half-year had been an internal war against the urge to light up, but he had held the line. The motivation hadn't changed, it had only hardened into an obsession. Every pound of muscle he put on from moving trees, every clean breath he took, and every calculated improvement to his appearance was a weapon meant to be wielded against his recently divorced ex-wife. He was still operating under the desperate, driving need to prove to her, and to the world, that it was her absolute loss. He wanted her to see him one day on a job site or passing through the city, looking sharp, fit, and entirely untouchable, and feel a pang of deep, unfixable regret. A sharp, dual-tone air horn echoed across the property, cutting through the low rumble of the diesel engines. Lunch break. The foreman shouted from across the lot. 30 minutes, boys. Shut 'em down. The rest of the crew immediately dropped their shovels, killed their engines, and began walking toward the shade of the tool trailers. Josh went through his standard shutdown sequence, idling the track loader for a brief moment to let the turbocharger cool before turning the key. The heavy mechanical roar died, leaving only the sound of birds chirping in the pristine trees beyond the property line. The very instant his mud-caked steel-toed boots touched the raw dirt outside the machine, Josh's hand flew to his pocket. He pulled out his phone, wiping a layer of fine limestone dust off the cracked screen with his thumb. He opened the app. And then, his heart stopped. He saw a notification. One that he had entirely given up on months ago. Anne-Marie had accepted his friend request. Josh froze. His breath caught in his throat, the chewed plastic straw falling completely out of his mouth and tumbling unnoticed into the dirt by his boots. His eyes widened as his gaze locked onto the little blue badge signifying a new unread direct message. His thumb trembled slightly as he tapped it open. Anne-Marie, hey you. I'm sorry it took so long to accept. I just went through a messy divorce, so I've been a little distracted. You should come up to Omaha sometime. I miss you. Josh stood completely paralyzed in the middle of the sun-baked yard. Around him, the guys on his crew were laughing, unzipping coolers, and cracking open sodas, but the noise of the world had dropped to an absolute dead silence. He couldn't believe it. He felt like the ground beneath his feet had suddenly turned into liquid. The message was entirely outside the realm of what he had expected, unless you counted his absolute wildest, most unrealistic late-night dreams. Over the last 7 months of silence, he had envisioned every possible scenario. He had expected her to ignore him forever. He had expected her to block him. He had expected her to send a cold, reserved message demanding to know why he was contacting her after 15 years of total abandonment. He never, in a million years, expected her to lead with warmth. And he certainly couldn't believe that she was recently divorced too. What a statistical anomaly, he thought, his brain scrambling to process the sheer coincidence of it. What a perfect, unbelievable alignment of the stars. They were both broken down. They were both free. In that exact fraction of a second, fueled by an overwhelming surge of pure, unadulterated impulse and a massive spike of adrenaline, Josh acted entirely without thinking. His thumbs flew across the keyboard, typing a response before his logical brain could construct a single barrier. Josh, I miss you too. I could actually be up there in a few hours. I got nothing else going on right now. He hit send. The instant the bubble turned blue, a violent wave of goosebumps erupted across his arms and down his spine, despite the heat of the midday sun. Was this actually happening? Was this reality, or was he hallucinating from exhaustion and too many energy drinks? Was he seriously about to go see her? Possibly today. The sheer weight of the moment overwhelmed him. His feet still hadn't moved an inch since he first opened the phone. He stood like a statue beside the massive tracks of the loader, completely detached from the passage of time. He no longer understood what a minute was, or a second. He just kept his thumb pressed to the top of the screen, dragging it down over and over and over, manually refreshing the chat window. To his frantic mind, it felt like agonizing minutes were ticking by in the silence. In reality, it took exactly 17 seconds before the magical, flickering 3 dots appeared at the bottom of the screen, signaling to him that she was actively typing a response. His chest tightened. Anna Marie, that would be amazing. I'm so bored and we need to catch up. A second text immediately followed, popping up with a digital pin containing her physical address in a highly exclusive, wealthy suburb just outside of Omaha, Nebraska. Josh didn't even hesitate. He tapped the address and gave the message a heart emoji. He couldn't help it. He was feeling incredibly bold, intoxicated by the sudden, massive rush of dopamine. A small, rational voice in the back of his mind tried to whisper that sending a heart emoji was way too forward, too pick-me, or deeply cringe, but he didn't care. He was riding an electric high, a soaring wave of renewed self-worth that he hadn't felt in years. He felt unstoppable, desperately hoping that this was the turning point, that more and more good things would just keep happening to him from here on out. Without taking a second thought to weigh the professional consequences, Josh shoved the glowing phone into his pocket. He turned on his heel and walked straight across the sun-baked, dusty lot toward the shade of the main tool trailer, where his foreman, Scott, was sitting on a plastic crate, unboxing a deli sandwich. "Hey, Scott," Josh said, his voice carrying a calculated, heavy tightness as he forced himself to look his boss in the eye. "Look, to summarize the situation, I've got an emergency. My dad just had a ladder accident, and I need to go. I'm really sorry." He hated lying about his family. A sharp, ugly pang of guilt twisted in his gut, but the absolute desperation to escape his grim motel reality and run toward the sudden, dazzling promise of Anna Marie completely overrode his moral compass. Scott stopped mid-bite, his expression instantly shifting from relaxed to deeply concerned. He set his sandwich down on the lid of his cooler and stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. "Jesus, Dave. Go, man. Absolutely, get out of here," Scott said, stepping forward and placing a heavy, supportive hand on Josh's shoulder. He gave it a firm squeeze, stressing every word. "Family always comes first, bro. You know how we operate here. Do not worry about these limestone tears, and do not worry about the timeline. Take all the time you need with your dad. Seriously." "Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it," Josh mumbled, the guilt feeling heavier now against his chest, though it still wasn't enough to slow his momentum. "Don't mention it. Go." Scott waved him off. Just like that, Josh turned and walked away from the crew. He didn't stop to chat with the rest of the guys eating lunch in the shade, he just climbed straight into the high cab of his beat-up Ford F-150. He turned the key, the V8 engine roaring to life, and threw the truck into reverse. Tires spinning slightly on the loose terrain, he kicked up a massive, swirling cloud of dry clay dust as he tore out of the development, leaving his old life behind without a single look back. Thanks so much for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this week's story and found it relatable, enjoyable, or just a little comforting. Remember, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you found this helpful or know someone who might, don't forget to like the video and share it with your community. Your support means everything and helps us keep creating content just for you. And if you'd like to see sequels, vote on upcoming stories, or even chat with us, check out our Patreon. Every bit of support keeps the magic alive. Until next time, take care and stay true to yourself.